Okay, so here we are with grade 10 harmony again and looking at chordal analysis of a Haydn excerpt. If you haven't already done so, please print out the link below that is a PDF form of a Haydn sonata in A major. And yes, I just told you what key we're in. So we notice that it says name the key, which is very commonly the very first thing you want to do. And now the question is, when you're in grade 10, what is the next thing you want to do? And this is where you want to get out your handy dandy post-it notes and say to yourself, well, if A major is my main key, I'm going to do this along with you so that you can see where my thoughts are. If A major is my main key, it's got 3 sharps. We can go to E major with 4 sharps, which will mean a D sharp. And we can go to the left on our circle of fifths to D major, which is 2 sharps, which means we would have to have a G natural. Okay, so now at this point, I have this so far. But we don't stop there. We have to say my relatives are B minor for the relative of D major, F sharp minor, and C sharp minor. And now we have to say, stop before we start. We still have the G natural from above in B minor, but we also have an A sharp for the raised leading tone. We have an E sharp for the raised leading tone of F sharp minor, and we have a B sharp for the raised leading tone of C sharp minor, and we still need our D sharp because we're in 4 sharps. So before you go anywhere, you want to make a chart that is based on your circle of fifths and that you give yourself all of the information. I realize that some people think that it takes too much time to do this and that you'll just dive right in. I think that in the long run, across the board, people have said that when they finally break down and start doing this, it actually saves them time because it's sitting right in front of them. Every time they see an accidental, they've got a reference to think about. So that's just a word. So it says symbolize the harmony using functional chord symbols throughout. So that means we are going to be using Roman numbers everywhere. And it says symbolize the harmony using root quality symbols for the first 4 measures only. So remember that your upbeat is not considered measure 1. And indeed, for the most part, there is no context for the first upbeat. It usually implies a 1 or a 5 chord, but we don't worry about it if nothing is put down for that. So that would mean that in order to do 4 measures of root quality symbols, it's all the rest of that first line. The pickup measure does not count as measure 1. And it says circle the non-chord tones and classify them. There are going to be times today that I'm going to give you 2 different wordings because there are elements that have different layers of understanding. For instance, the word appoggiatura is an umbrella term that means on the beat unessential note. That on the beat unessential note could actually look like a passing note that is on the beat. We call that an accented passing tone or an accented neighbor tone. So there are times that I will say this could also be called. That doesn't mean that you have to change your mindset, but if you're in the midst of discovering that you are constantly calling things passing tones because they look like passing tones, then put an A in front of it and call it an accented passing tone because that's how your mind is thinking. So let's start with this allegro movement by saying we've got our chart handy. We know that we will put a capital A because letter E is name the form. Always take that as a way of saying if I look at this overall before I get started, I will have an idea of what areas are the same and what areas are different. You will save time if you discover that there's 2 bars repeated later. So if we put an A in our first bar, or above our 2/4 time, or between our system, and our B after the repeat sign at the end of line 2, we then look through this and say, if we have 4-bar phrases, our first phrase would start on the upbeat, and it would go to the first quarter note in bar 4. And then we would have an upbeat to the next line, and our phrase would go to right before that repeat sign. That means phrase 3 starts right after our repeat sign and goes to the all E's quarter notes at the end of line 3. And then we have our pickup and our final phrase. So we are now saying to ourselves, we have 4 4-bar phrases. Every one of them has a quarter note upbeat. And Haydn has been incredibly consistent. Each one of his upbeats is a dotted eighth followed by 2 32nd notes. That's always nice to understand that patterns are there in all pieces in some way. Now we look at phrase 4. Does phrase 4 look like the first line of A for rounded binary, the second line of A for balanced binary, or none of the above and it's just binary or simple binary? When I look at this phrase, it does open with the same 2 bars as the opening 2 bars, so I have put an A prime there. Right there, I've got an A prime. And now we know that the answer at the top of the page is rounded binary. This cannot be called ternary form. It is rounded binary. The repeat signs show us that there are 2 sections. So now that we know that there's a section later that has the same 2 bars, so that's 2 for the price of 1 when we get started, let's look at the very beginning of this. We're not going to worry excessively about the upbeat, but it looks like it is indicating a 1 chord and that there would be a circle around the D first 32nd note and a passing tone marked. On the downbeat of measure 1, we have a C sharp in A, which is the 1 in A major, and above it the root quality symbol will be A. When we change to count 2, we have an E, a D, and a B. I realize it's not a complete chord, but it's enough to say that is the dominant 7th in root position, or E7 for your root quality symbol. You would have also circled the A and called it a neighbor tone. Some people will call it an accented neighbor note, A and N, because of the feel of the moment. Either one is considered accurate. The downbeat of measure 2, we are back to the 1 chord and A for our root quality symbol. On count 2, we have 4 and a D for our root quality symbol. We circle the G first 32nd note and we have a passing tone there. Now life starts getting more interesting, doesn't it? We have a bar with an accidental. Now we're noticing that the motion of the bass here is D, D sharp, E. So on the downbeat of measure 3, we have a 1 in first inversion, which is an A over C sharp. It is not correct without that sharp sign. On the second 8th note of this bar, it still is the A over C sharp. You do not need to put any new symbols. When we go to count 2, we have a B and a D for 2 in first inversion, and it would be a small 2. Therefore, the root quality symbol is capital B, little m, over D. Now, when we go to our next chord, we have a D sharp, A, and C sharp. We can assume that the missing note would be an F sharp. So let's stop for a moment. D sharp, F sharp, A is a diminished triad. D sharp to C sharp is a minor 7. So that means this is a half diminished 7th in quality. So at this moment, we have a cadence point that is 7 half diminished 7 of 5 to 5. And above, for our root quality symbols, it would be D sharp half diminished 7 to E. At this point, I'm looking ahead and seeing that for the next line, there's a lot of D sharps. So I'm going to be wanting to set up phrase 2 to be in the key of E major. So it is like there is a pivoting that the 5 of A major in that half cadence becomes the 1. And this is what my first line looks like. And you can see here, I've got 2 options for that guy, right? no unessentials, one passing tone over here. Feel free to freeze that frame and make sure that everything on your sheet matches what I've got, and let's go on to line 2. We are now thinking in E major, and that the upbeat to line 2, which is at the end of the first line, is actually the 1 in the home key. When we look at our first chord, we have F sharp, A, and E. Here is the conundrum that everybody has to suss out. It implies a 2-4-2, F sharp, A, C, E. And it makes sense that the 5th isn't there. The problem is that E cannot be counted as the 7th because it does not resolve down a 2nd. So what does one do with this then? Well, we now have a pedal point. And the pedal point actually begins back here. I've got the beginning of the pedal for that 1 under this E. And then it goes all the way till the end of here. And over that we have a 2, 5, 7 here for A, C, E, G, and a 1. It is the only way that that E can make sense within the classical period. So now we say to ourselves, Karen just said that the second chord was A, C, E, G. No, I didn't. I said it was 5-7 of E major, which would make it B, D, F, A, with the D having a sharp on it. So that means we are circling the first note of our part of our 16th notes, E, and calling it an appoggiatura or an accented passing tone. And we also circle the C sharp, and we call it a passing tone. Might be an accented passing tone. It isn't very accented to my ear, but some people would say no, it's enough that they would count it. And then on the downbeat of the next bar, we have the 1, E, G, B. Now notice that when you look at the right hand and compare the first 2 bars of line 2, they appear repeated notes, 16th notes in exactly the same pattern. So that means the unessential notes should be circled in the same pattern. So in the second bar of line 2, we have A, the first note of our 16ths, being circled as an appoggiatura or accented passing tone, and the F sharp being circled as a passing tone and possible accented passing tone, which means that we have a 6th chord at the end of this bar. And then over the bar, A, C sharp, E is your 4 chord. And then we have a dominant going to a 1 in E major, and the rest of this line is the 1. The challenge is, what do we do with this 5 if we've got all those notes above it? This is where you certainly can do some circles, but you can also acknowledge this quite nicely, that it is like a cadential 6/4 with a passing tone in between it. So in line 2, right here, you can have that this is a 6/5. It does go to the 4. We've got passing tone up here before it goes to the 3. So this 5 is this passing tone. But that's what's happening in that line. And it gives the inflection that if there was more notes, we would have created, or Haydn would have created, the passing 6/4 chord and chord progression. And it goes to 1. Then you notice that I had my capital B and a passing tone circled on F sharp, just the second last note of line 2. Are you ready for line 3? On we go. If not, please stop, digest, and then notice that we're around 14 minutes and come back. When we get to line 3, we notice that the G is natural and the A is sharp. So we come to our handy dandy and we say A sharp. The only key that has A sharp is B minor, and it does have G natural also. So we are going to be modulating to B minor. So at the beginning of that line, I just have written B minor. So in the key of B minor, we have C sharp, E, G as the first chord, which is our 2 diminished 6. Remember, it's not correct if you don't put the diminished sign in. And then on the next beat, we go, let's look up above. Repeated notes and then 4/16. Chances are Haydn is being consistent again, and we're going to be circling the C sharp at the beginning of the group of 4 and the A sharp in the middle. So the C sharp in the middle at the beginning of this group of 4 would be called a sounded suspension, so SUS, or S for suspension, and some people say it's an appoggiatura because it is sounded. Either one is acceptable, we're good, and that means that we have a 1 in first inversion. And our A sharp in the middle would be called a neighbor tone, NT, N, or accented neighbor note, ANN. Please don't use ANT for accented neighbor tone because ANT is the short form for anticipation note. And we are finding that people are complaining about markers not understanding what they intended. ANT is not meant for accented neighbor tone. Beginning of the next bar, we see we've got a C sharp and an E in the bass and a B up top. Well, that could be C sharp, E, G, B, which would be the 2 half diminished 7 in B minor. Now, could it be anything else? Yes, there are 2 ways of looking at this moment, which I would consider completely correct. And you could circle the B on count 1 as a sounded suspension and then claim that this was a 7 diminished 6 from the very beginning. If you want to count the first one as the 2 half diminished 7 because it sounds like it, then you would have to put 7 diminished 6 under your second 8th note. And then, of course, no surprise, 7 diminished 6 resolves to 1 in first inversion. And we have a passing tone on the C sharp in the treble. Now, I'm looking ahead and noticing that right over the bar line, my A is no longer sharped. My G is no longer naturaled, but I have no fresh accidentals. So that means we are going back to the home key. So what I did here was I said pivot, we are in the middle of a phrase. So a pivot is the best way to do the middle of a phrase change. So my 1 in first inversion, below it I say we're going to continue on in A major, and that's going to be a 2 in first inversion now. Over the bar, we see a D, an E, and a G sharp, which would be your dominant 4/2, with the A, the second 16th, being a passing tone. When we go on to count 2, we have a 1 in first inversion with a B passing tone over top. We go to 1 in root position, or 5/3 would be a good idea too, on the last 8th note, and then we end on a 5 for a half cadence in A major. So that phrase exhibited 2 separate keys that were joined by a pivot. Now, when we go on to phrase 4, we can rejoice because we can copy. Bar 1 comes down and is the beginning of this. 1, 5, 7, neighbor tone or accented neighbor tone. But then notice that instead of going to the 1 in bar 2 for the harmony, the melody is correct. We do get a full 2 counts. We do get a full 2 bars of the melody for rounded binary. But Haydn has his sense of humor, and because he's coming closer to the end of this section, he threw in a 6 instead of a 1 for that deceptive feel. And then after the rest, we have a 1 in first inversion, followed by a passing tone in the soprano B, a 4 on the second last bar, followed by a cadential 6/4 with the 6/4-5/3 to 1.